Michael Turner looked like the perfect father, devoted, gentle, and admired by everyone in Brookville until one scorching summer morning turned him into the most hated man in town. When his little daughter, Lily, was found lifeless in the back seat of his car, the world saw a tragic accident. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a web of secrets, lies, and dark motives that no one could have imagined. What really happened that day? A heartbreaking mistake or a carefully planned crime? Michael Turner was the kind of father everyone admired. In the quiet town of Brookville, his neighbors spoke of him as a man who had endured tragedy yet never let it harden him. After losing his wife, Claire, to cancer 2 years earlier, Michael dedicated every moment of his life to his daughter, Lily. She was his reason to wake up every morning, the only light that cut through his grief. He built his days around her, preparing her breakfast, reading bedtime stories, and tucking her into bed each night with her favorite stuffed rabbit. People saw them as inseparable, a father and daughter bound by love and loss. But beneath that perfect image, cracks had begun to form. Michael's job at the insurance company had grown demanding. He was under pressure to meet sales targets, his boss constantly reminding him that failure meant termination. Bills piled up at home. The mortgage was behind, credit card debts were growing, and every letter in the mail seemed to bring new worry. He smiled in front of others, but inside he was exhausted. Sleep came rarely, and when it did, nightmares of his wife's final days jolted him awake in cold sweats. His world revolved around survival, not just his own, but his daughter's too. Lately, he had begun to forget small things. Once, he left the stove on after cooking dinner. Another time, he forgot to pick Lily's bag from daycare. His coworkers joked that he needed a vacation, but Michael brushed it off. The truth was, he felt like his mind was slipping away. He often found himself sitting in his car long after parking, unable to remember what he was supposed to do next. Sometimes he stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror, wondering if he was losing himself. Despite his struggles, Michael tried to maintain the routine that kept Lily's world safe and predictable. Every morning, he packed her small pink lunchbox, filled with cut fruit and juice. He buckled her in her car seat carefully, always checking twice before closing the door. He told himself he would never let anything happen to her. To the people around him, Michael Turner looked like a man fighting through pain with love. But fate was waiting quietly, ready to turn one ordinary morning into an unforgettable nightmare. The morning of July 14th began like any other, but something about it felt off from the start. Michael woke up to the shrill sound of his alarm and the blinding light streaming through his window. He had overslept again. Panic hit immediately. He jumped out of bed, rushing to get dressed while Lily still slept peacefully in her small pink bed. The clock ticked past 8, and he knew he was running late for work and for Lily's daycare drop-off. Everything blurred together: the hurried breakfast, the spilled coffee, the ringing phone, the growing sense of pressure pressing down on his chest. He carried Lily to the car, her head resting gently on his shoulder, her favorite stuffed rabbit dangling from her hand. She was still half asleep when he buckled her into her car seat. The sun was already beating down, and the temperature was climbing fast. Michael started the car and turned up the air conditioning, but his thoughts were elsewhere. His phone buzzed with messages from his boss and clients. There was a critical meeting he couldn't afford to miss. He muttered to himself about the files he had forgotten to print and the presentation that wasn't ready. His mind was split in 1,000 directions, none of them on the small voice in the back seat asking softly for her juice. The route to daycare and the office overlapped for several miles. Somewhere along the drive, Michael's thoughts drifted entirely. A phone call came in, and he answered automatically, diving into a conversation about policy renewals. His hands moved on their own, turning, parking, grabbing his bag as if following a routine burned into memory. The moment he stepped out of the car, he was already thinking about work. The sound of Lily's breathing faded into the background, forgotten. Hours passed under the scorching sun. The parking lot shimmered with heat. Inside the car, the air grew suffocating, the temperature climbing past unbearable. By noon, a passerby noticed something strange: a small hand pressed against the window, motionless. Panic spread through the office as people rushed out. The sight that met them was one no one could erase. Lily Turner, the bright little girl the town adored, was gone. The news would shake Brookville to its core, and every whisper that followed carried the same haunting question: how could her father not have known? The investigation began the very same day as police officers surrounded the parking lot where the tragedy had unfolded. Michael sat on the curb, staring at the ground, his face pale and blank. Reporters arrived quickly, their cameras flashing as neighbors and co-workers gathered in shock. To the public, it looked like a heartbreaking accident, a moment of forgetfulness that cost a child her life. But as detectives began piecing together details, their sympathy slowly turned into suspicion. Something about Michael's story didn't quite fit. Detective Aaron Miles, a seasoned investigator known for his sharp instincts, was the first to notice the inconsistencies. Michael claimed he thought he had dropped Lily off at daycare before heading to work. Yet, when officers checked with the daycare staff, they confirmed she never arrived that morning. Surveillance footage from Michael's route showed his car passing the daycare entrance without stopping. It seemed impossible to mistake such an important step in his daily routine. The detective wondered how a loving father could forget his daughter sitting right behind him. When they searched Michael's car, more questions emerged. The vehicle had a built-in safety system designed to alert drivers if a backseat passenger was still inside after the engine was turned off. But investigators found that the alert system had been disabled. The manufacturer confirmed that it required several steps to turn off manually. It couldn't happen by accident. This discovery changed everything. What once looked like a tragic mistake now hinted at something deliberate. Detectives obtained a warrant to search Michael's phone and computer. The results were disturbing. In the days before the incident, his search history included phrases like "How long does it take for a car to overheat?" and "Can heat cause instant death?" Investigators also uncovered records of a new life insurance policy taken out on Lily's name, with Michael listed as the sole beneficiary. It was worth $250,000, a fortune for a man drowning in debt. The case quickly became a media storm. Some people refused to believe it. They defended Michael, saying he was grieving and misunderstood. Others were convinced he had done the unthinkable. The town that once admired him now viewed him with suspicion, and the man who had been seen as a devoted father was now being painted as a murderer in disguise. The courthouse in Brookville was packed on the first day of Michael Turner's trial. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashing as he was led inside wearing a gray suit that hung loose on his thin frame. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes looked hollow. The prosecution opened with a chilling narrative, claiming that Michael had not simply forgotten his daughter, but had planned her death for financial gain. They presented the jury with evidence of his mounting debts, overdue bills, and the recent life insurance policy. To them, the motive was clear: money and desperation. The prosecutor detailed how Michael had disabled the car's safety alarm weeks before the tragedy, arguing that it proved intent. They showed digital evidence of his internet searches, text messages about his financial stress, and inconsistencies in his statements. A forensic expert testified that it was nearly impossible for a parent to forget a child in such a visible position for so many hours. Every word painted Michael as a cold and calculated man who had seen his daughter as a means to escape his problems. The defense, however, told a different story. They spoke of grief, exhaustion, and trauma. They reminded the jury that Michael had lost his wife only 2 years earlier and was struggling to raise a child alone while balancing work and financial pressure. A psychologist testified that chronic stress and emotional trauma could cause severe lapses in memory, known as forgotten baby syndrome. The defense insisted that this was a tragic accident, not a murder. They brought neighbors and co-workers to the stand who described Michael as loving, kind, and patient. Some even cried while recalling how much he adored Lily. The courtroom atmosphere grew heavier with each passing day. Journalists debated the case on national television, while the community remained divided. Some saw a man crushed by grief and guilt. Others saw a manipulative killer hiding behind tears. When the jury finally retreated to deliberate, silence filled the room. Hours stretched into an entire day. Then the verdict was announced: guilty of second-degree murder. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Michael stood still, his face pale, his lips trembling. He whispered his daughter's name before the guards took him away. As the doors closed behind him, it felt as though the entire town exhaled in disbelief, unsure if justice had truly been served or if something far more complicated had just been buried forever. Years passed after Michael Turner's conviction, but the story refused to fade. The tragedy of Lily's death and her father's imprisonment continued to haunt Brookville. People still debated whether justice had been done, or whether an innocent man had been punished for a terrible mistake. Michael kept to himself in prison, rarely speaking to anyone. He avoided interviews and letters from journalists, living in quiet isolation. Guards described him as polite but distant, a man who seemed to carry a permanent weight on his shoulders. He spent most of his time in the prison library, reading old case files and writing notes no one ever saw. Then, one afternoon, a retired detective named Aaron Miles revisited the case for a criminal psychology seminar. Something about it still bothered him. He remembered how the evidence had felt too neat, too convenient. While reviewing the original surveillance footage, he noticed a small but crucial detail that had been overlooked. The timestamp from a security camera near the daycare didn't match the official timeline. It showed Michael's car slowing down in front of the daycare around the same time he claimed he had stopped there. But the footage also revealed another vehicle following closely behind a dark SUV with tinted windows. The license plate was never checked during the original investigation. Curious, Miles dug deeper. He found reports of a local loan shark Michael had been involved with months before the tragedy. Rumors suggested that Michael had borrowed money to pay hospital bills for his late wife and had fallen behind on repayment. The loan shark was known for intimidation tactics and had ties to insurance scams. The possibility that someone could have tampered with Michael's car or staged the situation began to take shape. But before the detective could reopen the case officially, devastating news broke from the prison. Michael Turner was found dead in his cell during the early morning head count. There were no signs of struggle, no clear cause of death. The note he left behind was brief, just 3 words. "I didn't forget." The message reignited public debate. Some saw it as a final confession, others as proof of his innocence. The case was quietly closed, but whispers persisted. Many in Brookville still believe that the truth behind Lily's death died with Michael, and that somewhere out there, the real story remains hidden, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it.